I'm not sure. I think that resistance to change is as purposeful as we sometimes talk about it. I think resistance to change often comes from lack of clarity about the change. I think communication and shared language and shared values is at the heart of helping people understand change. I mean, some of the biggest changes in my life, marriage, having two children, one 8 and one 5, those are huge changes that I willingly got into, but I got into them because I think a greater sense of clarity and shared understanding with my partner, my spouse. And I think if we approached change in schools more like a mutual search for clarity with one another, that there'd be less resistance to change. And then a second connected thought is, I was at the National Association of Independent Schools annual conference last week and heard Jim Collins speak again, the author of Good to Great and Great by Choice. And he explained again, which I love, that mediocrity is not usually from resistance to change, that mediocrity is from chronic inconsistency. And I think a lot of that inconsistency and lack of clarity comes because we can't see the same picture as our peers and colleagues. We haven't made it visible because it's invisible. So even when we think about a practice like project-based learning, if you've got 10 people in a room, project-based learning might mean 10 different things to those people. But if you start to visualize it, and I think that's where design becomes so important, if you draw it and sketch it and prototype it and experiment with it and develop a sense of shared understanding and become consistent as a team of applying it, then I think the resistance melts away. You know, I think it impacts what I do and what schools do immeasurably. I know the last 5 years in particular in my principalship, there was a great deal of talk about applying design thinking to schools and to education, to applying design thinking to learning environments and learning spaces. And I think that's incredibly important. I'm having a huge education in design by joining Unboundry because I hope to one day call myself a designer. I've for a long time thought of myself as a curricular designer or as an instructional designer, but I'm getting a real education here from some incredible professional designers. I've had to develop a tougher skin because of the element of critique that's important to design. So in pedagogical master planning that I was describing, in developing some print pieces to help people understand that, we went through a rapid design process for it, and in one case had 27 iterations of the design and then decided to scrap it because we learned so much from those design iterations that we realized we were going about it in not exactly the right way, and we could do better by going down a different path. So we essentially started over, but we started over with so much more knowledge because of that design process. And I think that's where schools are now. The schools that understand the change and the kind of perfect storm of change in our world. For instance, one storm coming in, and I mean storm in this case in a positive way, how much more we know about the brain, that 95% of what we know about the brain we've learned in the last 20 years, that should help transform schools. The degree of change in our world in terms of learners being able to be creative contributors to the world and not just passive recipients of knowledge, that we're no longer in a radio-only world where you have to be essentially a receiver to the broadcast tower, but you can be a co-creator of programming as a 8-year-old, as an 11-year-old, as a 17-year-old in your real-life world. And school is, I think, trying to respond and react in a good way to those changes in our world and our changes of knowledge and understanding about humans and the brain. And design is going to help us do that if we will be purposeful and intentional about that, because those iterative prototypings that experimentation, that sense of questioning and observation that's inherent to design work will help us get better faster in the system we call school for young people.